Intervals are awesome and oftentimes get sort of like skipped over when people first start learning about theory, scales, and chords. Things tend to skip straight from melody to chords, but intervals are sort of the building blocks of chords themselves. I'm Blank Forms. Check me out on Instagram, wherever you listen to music. So, a bit of vocabulary to start. Intervals means any two notes together. If you get three notes together, you're in chords. Intervals is just two, and then all the intervals have names, and the names describe how far they are from each other. So we have major second, major third, fourth, fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and then we're at an octave. Okay, so a large part of what makes intervals awesome is just how they interact with synthesizers specifically. It's very different, obviously, than how they interact, say, on an acoustic piano or other acoustic instruments. And it has to do with how the frequencies are sort of like all swimming together much more closely. For example, I'm going to play the major second down here on a low octave. And most synthesizers will do some degree of saturating or distorting. This one, you have a lot of control over it. Right now, I have just a little bit of saturation happening. And you can hear the dissonance between those two causes just a bit of like beating, a bit of harmonic complexity. Now, if I turn these up and saturate them to the point of distorting, you can really hear the beating, almost more, especially if I balance them. You can hear the difference between the two, the way that they are frequency modulating each other, more than you hear the two pitches themselves. If I go back down, it's there, but more subtle. If I go back here, also the filtering plays into that because those are going to be building up high frequency information in harmonic intervals all the way up to the top above that. So some of that high frequency information is the waveform because I'm using squares, but a lot of it is also the dissonance between the two, the mathematical complexity between these two notes. And so that's all very technical, but this is just a long way of saying that you can really sort of like bring out the interactions of two notes on synthesizers in a way that you cannot easily do with just about any other instrument. And that works for all of them. So most musical settings these days work in equal temperament, meaning every note's equally far apart from each other in terms of intervals. And that works great for most settings, but it does mean that some of the intervals are not as true or not as in tune as they could be. So on a synth, it's nice that you have the possibility of actually tuning yourself out of equal temperament when you want to sort of pull more possibility out of each interval. So a good example is major third. The major third we're used to hearing in equal temperament is actually a little sharp of a true major third. You might be able to hear, I'll turn those up a bit. When I go back to, here's the major third we're used to hearing. Now I'm going to shrink it a bit. Pulled the top note down just a little bit. It's a little flat of what we're used to hearing. But as you can hear, the dissonance kind of goes away and it becomes a simpler harmonic relationship. Here's equal temperament. And there's a true major third. It's a different feel. I'll go back to there's what we're used to hearing. You can really hear it up there. There's an in tune major third. So that's a huge difference that wouldn't be as obvious on a different instrument, but because these things all sort of like swim together and their beating and interactions are more clear on synthesizers, you can get a ton out of just that possibility. And that works for just about all the intervals. Minor thirds, which we're not going to play with too much in this video, also are a little out of tune. You can fix that. Fourths and fifths. You can definitely find a sweet spot in there. The more dissonant intervals, major seconds, major sevenths, and some others, there's not as much a spot where the tuning slots right in, but there are still some fun options to play with. The caveat to that, of course, is that if you tune your oscillators to one particular interval, it doesn't mean it's going to be right when you start playing through other intervals, when you have a chord progression and so on. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis, but it's a fun thing to play around with and find what you like, and also is great for sampling and creating a sample library of really beautifully tuned intervals. Next up, the intervals sort of feel different. It's almost like they're intensified as you go higher in register. So for example, major second again, fairly dissonant there, but as you can hear, the interaction, it's almost more intense and in a sense more grating. Higher versus lower. But also as you get super low, it can almost become muddy and sort of lose its actual character. Okay, so to start, a major second. Fairly dissonant, a fairly complex mathematical relationship between the two notes, and you can hear how that creates a lot of beating, a lot of harmonic action up top. And again, it intensifies as you go high. A major third. What we think of often as a more consonant interval. It's the interval that's the linchpin of a major chord. So you can often use it to reference a major chord without actually playing all three notes. And for example, oftentimes when I'm trying to say to the listener, here's a major chord, I won't actually play a major chord. I'll play, say the root, C, and then the third, but an octave above. Or even lower. Classic film scoring trick these days. Major fourth. This is one of the more simple acoustic relationships between two notes. They aren't all that different, and you can hear the beating when I have them both distorted is not nearly as present here as it was there. They kind of just melt into each other. Same goes for a fifth. Almost even more so, especially if I tune that just right. Those just feel like they have sort of married into one lovely pitch. Major sixth. This one has a very tuneful quality to me. There's tons of songs that start so I really hear it that way. It's like NBC theme. It feels very sort of warm and inviting. All right, next up, major seventh. So this one is pretty dissonant, at least to my ear. You can hear there's a lot going on up there. Really complex. I really love major sevenths because they have sort of an inherent desire in them to resolve, to go up to the next note and therefore have the octave. But you have the choice of not giving the audience that sound and just sort of sitting on that and sort of creating a kinetic energy to something. I find it really fun to have those two and to set up that desire for this note, but then answer that desire with something that doesn't just say C, but instead that, so a different note down below to sort of trick the ear, or anyway, so again, we have seconds, major thirds, fourths, fifths, major sixth, major sevenths, and then octaves. The next aspect of this that I really love is how intervals interact with effects. So I'm only going to work with the Bucket Brigade delay that's a part of this, but if you get, say, huge washy reverbs going with intervals, this is going to be intensified even more so. But say just playing that major third and beginning to wash it out in some effects. All of the interactions we've been talking about, the dissonance or the non-dissonance, the filtering, the frequency modulation between the two pitches, just kind of comes out even further, especially when you have really resonant effects following it. And so oftentimes, say spelling out a whole chord, a whole seventh chord, or a whole whatever, really complex chords, you sort of end up overwhelming the effect in a way, and you don't get just like the true clarity and directness you could out of using just a few choice notes in that chord to say what you were trying to say harmonically. Here's a fifth. That's really nice, especially if I get a little pitch motion happening in the notes themselves. Here's a sixth. A seventh. Now I'm going to jump into some chord progressions, or I guess not chord progressions, interval progressions, though to me they end up kind of feeling like chord progressions. I'll start with something fairly dissonant. I'm going to go with a major seventh, and then a seventh just above that. This actually forms a minor seventh, which is a different interval, but still similar quality somewhat. And then I'm going to go to a third, and a third, but I'm going to split those thirds by an octave. So I'm going to go like that. So again, I have seventh, seventh, third, split by an octave, and third. All right, get some effects happening on this. Maybe some attack, make it a bit pad-ish. Up an octave. Really nice already. Higher. You can hear it getting a little more, the intervals intensifying up there. And again down low, even more distorted, and filter opened. So anyway, that's just a quick intro into intervals and how awesome they can be in production, writing, on synths especially, and with effects especially. Check out my other videos. Follow me on Instagram. I'm Blank Forms. Please like and subscribe. And yeah, thanks for checking it out.